So basically, I will be talking a little bit about the mindsets that have shaped and are still shaping our cities. I will then briefly describe what we found to be the transport and urban systems functioning in most territories. And I will then introduce the 15-minute cities framework, which is, in a way, a different way of thinking and of seeing cities. As just mentioned, I will be touching upon thinking, mapping, and change a little bit, and I will be illustrating that with an example. So let me start with the mindsets. A key idea, in particular from the 40s or 50s on, is that streets belong to cars. Cars have been linked to notions such as freedom, progress, power, status, virility. And then the increase in car traffic that we see is often seen as inevitable. It's the inevitable result of development, because as income increases, people choose to buy cars. They have the right to do that. There is a very interesting work by a historian called Peter Norton that explains how we got into these ideas. They were not always there. I can share a few links if any of you is interested. Now, the result of this mindset are decisions focused on accommodating cars, on setting the conditions so that people can drive to places. Not access places, drive to places. And as soon as cars became popular, congestion started to increase. Congestion can be seen as there being too many cars for too few roads. Now, too many cars we just saw, that's inevitable. So we need to build roads. And that's been what we have been doing for decades now. The logic being, if we build roads, congestion will go up. And that is a very clear example of linear thinking. If I do A, then B happens. Stop, end of the story. Except that complex systems are non-linear. Linear thinking, as just mentioned, leave us ill-equipped to understand the functioning of the systems we're trying to change. And thus, we find solutions that are not really so. This takes me to the next part of the presentation. What we find when we actually observe the systems functioning by using system thinking, we see that when we invest in roads and we increase the road's capacity, there is indeed reduced congestion and the travel time is reduced. It doesn't, however, stop there, because as soon as one can move faster with cars, then more people choose to drive cars, which increases traffic volume and congestion again, and increases travel time again, which lead us to build more roads. So note how a visual tool, a very simple visual tool, there are arrows and a few words, it's called a causal loop diagram, allows us to see the nonlinearities in systems. It is not if A, then B. There are feedbacks. The interactions and nonlinearities do not stop there. The more roads, then the bigger the size of the region within which I can move to and still get to the city in a reasonable time budget, right? I don't know, 20 minutes by car. Now, the more roads, then the more people move away from the city, often to less dense and residential areas, which increases the need for cars and increases traffic volume again. The need for cars increases because urban planning also follows a linear logic. Just talked about parts versus systems and how we tend to divide things. And indeed, what we observe in most cities, and maybe it's the case in yours, we have all services clustered in the city center, huge residential area, offices clustered in another district, and then a few malls here and there. So we need to travel long distances to meet every need. Now, these two dynamics that in transport jargon can be called induced demand and urban sprawl lead to a third dynamic, which is the reduction of the attractiveness of transport modes, of sustainable transport modes. Basically, walking and cycling is no longer an option if you need to travel 30 kilometers to go to your office, which you likely do in the urban planning we just saw. Public transportation is also less attractive because you likely do not have a bus stop near your place, so it takes longer. And you may notice that these dynamics, this system functioning, that is a result of the design we chose for our cities, is creating the opposite conditions that what we need, for example, to reduce emissions or to reduce air pollution, because it is increasing car attractiveness and dependency, and it is reducing the attractiveness and thus the number of people that choose to walk, cycle, or use public transport. Now, the good news, because there are good news, is that these dynamics are not physical laws. They can be changed. But to change them, first and foremost, we need to think in systems, which leads me to the last part of my presentation. The 15-minute city framework is this idea that rather than dividing things up and centralizing stuff, we can instead create a network of neighborhoods with access, each of them, to all services. We can still move from a neighborhood to another if we want to, but we do not need to. We can really meet our needs by walking or cycling in less than 15 minutes. This idea basically doesn't optimize a part of the system, it changes the way the parts are organized. And that changes everything. This idea, the 15-minute city, is already guiding decisions in cities like Paris and in other cities such as Milan, Barcelona, Melbourne, and Pontevedra in Spain. Among others, there are many. Now, if we look at it at the level of a single street, it looks like this. For example, rather than using public space for car storage, which we would do here and here, we can use it for other uses. We can extend shops, we can have green areas, we can use it for recreation. And depending, of course, on how the street is designed, you get certain results and not others. Notice that what is interesting with this systemic innovation that the 15-minute city framework allows us to do is that while changing the way we organize things, we actually get to solve multiple problems at the same time. In the city, emissions are lower. You have healthier citizens because they are doing physical activity. Air quality is slightly better. You likely have better interactions between people, which may contribute to solve the loneliness problem that we have in many of our societies. Kids may have the right, again, to play in the street, which they don't in most cities. You may have local shops that have more customers. So just in a nutshell, our cities have been shaped with a car-centric and linear mindset. The systems that result from this mindset are car-dependent, which lead to increased traffic volume and air pollution and emissions. We can do better than that. And the 15-minute city is just one example of how thinking differently can lead to better systems for better lives. Many thanks.